I often get asked how I became a leftist, and it seems like in asking this, people are looking for some inciting incident or text that changed my political views forever. So to answer honestly, one thing that drove me to Marxism more than anything else was my personal relationship with Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. No, for real, I'm serious. And I wasn't just some casual churchgoer. I was all in, like leading worship and Bible studies, going on mission trips, not having sex, the whole thing.
Virginity is cool. Say it with me, guys. Come on.
Virginity is cool.
Come on. Virginity is cool.
So how did I get from that to someone who is considered a sort of woke, Marxist, communist, online super soldier? I'm going to talk about it today because I think it's important for a couple of reasons. First, because I didn't become a leftist philosopher in spite of being an evangelical Christian, but precisely because of being an evangelical Christian. And second, I think that understanding the connection between Christianity and radical politics not only helps us to better understand the bullet train to Christian nationalism that we're currently on, it might also equip us with the tools that we need to fight back against that Christian nationalism. And this is also a sort of response video to some of the most important philosophical voices on the internet that will argue that there's a fundamental incompatibility between Christianity and Marxism.
She said, "I'm a Christian and a Marxist." And I thought, no.
So now, with every head bowed and every eye closed, let me share my testimony with you so that you can see how Jesus can also lead you down the pathway of Marxist radicalism. Amen. Now, one of the reasons that it's especially weird that I became an evangelical Christian is that I did not grow up in an evangelical household. My family didn't even identify as Christian, but as Irish Catholic, meaning that we went to Mass most weeks. I often went to Sunday school, and every now and then we would pray before dinner. Now, I was lured into the evangelical world when the coolest kid in my 8th grade class invited me to his church youth group. You know, the pizza was free, the music was vaguely rock-inflected, and the people were all incredibly nice. It felt a lot more welcoming than the chaos of my middle school or my fairly unstable home life, so I kept going back. Also, one of the youth group leaders was this cool college dude that took us to indie rock shows, and he burned me CDs by bands like The Promise Ring, Jimmy Eat World, and the Get Up Kids. So that was pretty cool. There was also some less cool stuff, like the youth pastor who asked me if I was confident that if I got in a car accident on the way home that night, that I would be going to heaven and not hell. He also let me know that my ancestral religion, the Catholic Church, was in fact not really Christian. Also, I'm pretty sure that youth pastor eventually married an 18-year-old that was one of his youth group members, and then she turned 18, and then they magically got married because that's what God wanted. Another strange feature was an intense purity culture, which meant that looking at porn or jacking off or even having impure thoughts was a sin. And of course, having sex before marriage was like spiritual suicide.
What I hear from young ladies is there's this need for that physical touch. And from a male being, that's, I believe, the father role is.
I actually remember that me and my best friend used this Christian website that was meant to track our browsing so that if we went to a porn website, it would email the other one so that they could confront us. I'm pretty sure that's a real thing that we did. If anyone remembers the name of that website, please let me know. Do you have a memory of us using a website to track if we looked at porn and jacked off when we were like in 8th and 9th grade?
We did, yes. It was called XXX.com. I think it was like XXX.com or something.
Wait, was it like XXX Church or something?
Yes.
Oh my God, I haven't been able to remember this. Then do you think it actually worked?
No.
Because I don't think I remember ever getting an email from you. Did you ever get an email from me?
I got one email from you once.
Nice. And do you feel like having that app or like using that website, did it add an extra layer of like deterrent at all when you were thinking about doing stuff to yourself?
No.
And then do you like have a memory of kind of in like the youth groupie years of feeling did like the jerking off was like especially bad?
It was a thing that needed to be fixed, but it didn't feel like the primary thing that needed to be solved.
See, I think I remember it as being more intense than it was, which I guess says more about me than anything else.
Yeah, your internalized shame and guilt.
Okay, well, this isn't therapy. I just wanted to ask you one thing. Okay, before I keep going, I want to thank Henson Shaving for helping me to make this video. Now, back when I was a hippie Christian, I actually had pretty long hair and an unruly beard because that's what the cool, radical Christian guys all did. But until recently, my shaving habits have still been pretty lazy. I've just been using a beard trimmer for everything, which often leaves me stubbly and bumpy. And I guess it's something I just sort of took for granted. Now, recently I started shaving with this gorgeous single blade razor from Henson, and I immediately realized that I had been missing out for years. I mean, not only is it nice to have an actually clean shaven neck and beard line, but my skin is now less red and bumpy than it was from my previous routine. And it's not because this thing is full of high-tech special features, it's because it's clean and simple and has a classic and functional design. So now, whether it's special events, family weddings, or times where I just want to look good and feel good about myself, I can use my Henson razor to level up my grooming game. Now, if you're a kind of lazy dude like me who hasn't used a proper razor in years, or maybe you're still a practicing Christian hippie, I can't recommend this thing enough. They're clean, they're simple, they're well designed, and there's no unnecessary BS here. And with the holidays right around the corner, I can really confidently say, if you need a gift for someone who shaves or really needs to shave, get them a Henson razor. These things look great, they work great. It's an awesome gift. All you got to do is head to the link in the description and use the code Michael Burns to receive 100 blades for free. That's over 2 years worth of blades. Just make sure both products are in your cart for the code to take effect. And thank you so much to Henson Shaving for sponsoring this video. And do know that when you buy a razor from Henson, it supports the channel and helps us do what we're doing. So thank you all around. Enjoy your razor. Now, let's get back to it. And of course, the bedrock of all of this was the version of Christian popular culture that we were supposed to consume instead of the mainstream culture of sin. In practice, this meant that a youth pastor found out that I listened to the Wu-Tang Clan, and he told me that I had to listen to the Cross movement instead. But I think what ultimately attracted me to this world, even though I didn't have the language to articulate it at the time, was a sense of meaning and community that existed outside of the ultra-commercial neoliberal culture of the late 90s and early 2000s. You know, if only someone would have just given me a copy of Naomi Klein's No Logo instead, I could have saved a lot of time and potentially lost my virginity in high school. Probably not, though. But you know, life felt pretty meaningless, with every brand selling you a different lifestyle that was somehow unique to your individuality, and every MTV featured band offering a full aesthetic that you could identify with. And in the suburbs where I grew up, it seemed like the goal of everything was to do well at school so you could go to college, so you could get a job in marketing or business, and then you could get your own home in the suburbs to have kids in and do it all over again. You could just reproduce the whole system unquestioningly, because why not? Why not? You know, all while someone named Bush or Clinton gave speeches and waged wars in the Middle East.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
But even in that weird evangelical subculture, I learned that life could have a larger purpose than the repetition of a market-based lifestyle, and that communities were able to gather around shared ideas and attempt to create another world in the here and now. Honestly, it gave me an almost philosophical sense of wonder, one that made me feel like I could do something meaningful with my life, or participate in the creation of a kinder and more just and more beautiful world. It just felt a lot more meaningful than go to school, get job, find wife, have kid, retire, read book, die. So I did what all good spiritual revolutionaries do. I convinced my parents that I needed to go to Christian college to study theology. But I had no idea what I was getting into or where it was going to ultimately lead me. Okay, if you're waiting for the radical Marxist transformation part, we're not quite there yet, but tuck in, comrade. We're close. Now, I went into college thinking that studying theology would help me to better understand the radical potential of Christianity, and that eventually I could work in some sort of ministry that was oriented towards social justice. The idea was to be part of something bigger than myself that might eventually change the world. But I soon started to realize that my vision might have been just a little bit naive.
President Bush is a hero.
For one, I was on campus during the first election that I was old enough to vote in, Bush v. Kerry 2004. And while I assumed most of my fellow young Christians would probably side with the guy who at least wanted to expand healthcare coverage and environmental protections, and that the cool ones would support Ralph Nader, my campus was covered with signs that said things like, "Kerry is scary, vote Bush." Now, to give you a precise sense of the type of virgin that I was at the time, once election results came in that night, I went back to my dorm room and I listened to Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are A-Changin'" on vinyl and started crying. And then my roommate came in and called me a word that we don't say anymore. Unless you're like a right-wing Christian chud, because then you love that word. It's probably one of your favorite words. You probably say it all the time. And you might be calling me that word right now. This was all exacerbated by the fact that many of the good Christians I knew, both on my campus and in my larger community, were shockingly conservative in their personal politics. Whereas I saw Christianity as a radical call to deconstruct systems of power for the sake of creating a world of justice for the least of these, lots of believers that I knew saw their faith as conducive with free markets, American militarism, homophobia, and xenophobia, among other things. Also, no jacking off. Did I mention this yet? Did I mention yet that at the age of 14 or 15, I entered a religious cult that said jacking off was the worst thing you could possibly do? Did I mention that one? We didn't even know what gooning was back then. I struggled to hear a verse like Acts 4:32 through 35 and hear anything that made Christianity and capitalism seem congruent. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. I don't know about you, but that last bit sounds a little bit like from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs, almost. Rather than believing that another world was possible, it felt like many of the Christians that I knew simply wanted to use their faith to justify their positions of privilege and power in the world as it already existed. Faith was more like a personal brand than it was a call to anything radical or transformative.
It is the Lord God who gives you power to get wealth.
Now, if it wasn't for a couple of things, I probably would have just jumped ship here. One of them was finding a church that seemed to embody a lot of these values and practices, and a place where I felt like this stuff mattered. The other thing was the appearance of a new progressive wing of evangelicalism that arose around this time called emerging Christianity. And my new church, along with this movement, both brought me back into the fold and eventually got me arrested by U.S. Capitol Police. This is a true story. I'm not lying. But no, I was not arrested on January 6th. Now, in my experience, emerging Christianity was a call to push back against hierarchy, tradition, and commodification, and rediscover the truth at the heart of Christianity, which was more about changing the world for the sake of justice than it was about winning culture wars. Some from this world were also associated with something called the Red Letter Movement. These are people that thought that we needed to refocus on the red words in the Bible, which, in case if you don't know, the red words in a lot of the versions of the Bible are the ones that Jesus said. In case you don't know this, Jesus is the main guy, or at least the main guy in the second half of the Bible. He's sort of a, I guess Luke Skywalker type, something like that. Now, one of my favorites from this crowd was a sociology professor and minister from Pennsylvania named Tony Campolo. And I saw him speak a few times, and he would often begin his talks with a version of this line. I'm very sad that I couldn't find a recording of this, so I'm going to do my best. Campolo would say, I have 3 things I'd like to say today. First, while you were sleeping last night, 30,000 kids died of starvation or diseases related to malnutrition. Second, most of you don't give a shit. What's worse is that you're more upset with the fact that I said shit than the fact that 30,000 kids died last night. And this one hit really hard because so much of my time in the Christian world was spent talking about the horrors of jacking off or having consensual relations with a partner, or even worse, being gay, with so little emphasis put on actually centering our religious practice on fighting against injustice and oppression in our world. Another writer and activist that I found at this time that I found really influential was Shane Claiborne. He was even more radical. This guy, who had white dreads, called for a Christian faith that primarily looked like radical love and compassion for vulnerable communities.
When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me something to drink? When I was sick, did you care for me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? Our faith is worked out in love and compassion for other people.
Now, while not yet Marx-pilled, this movement at least turned me into a sort of Christian socialist, convinced that faith wasn't something that you just believed, but rather it was something that you did. And that social equality wasn't an option, but a necessity, which meant that fighting against injustice and oppression mattered just as much as going to Bible study and singing songs about how much you loved Jesus. And honestly, it probably mattered way more than that. And on December 14th, 2005, this led me to being arrested outside the US Capitol building for blocking the entrance with a group that was protesting against cuts to the federal budget that were going to be disastrous for vulnerable Americans. And this group was led by a bunch of radical Christian ministers and activists. Around this time is also when I first encountered what was then referred to as postmodern philosophy and the work of people like philosopher John Caputo and writer Peter Rollins, both of whom pulled from the work of French philosopher Jacques Derrida to add a new philosophical depth to many of the theological questions that I'd been thinking about.
Do I think that when I die I'm going to face eternal reward or punishment? No. I think that is a figment of religious imagination, and to literalize it causes a lot of unhappiness. The study of religion is a study of one of the humanities. It's like studying history or theology or philosophy or politics. You're studying one of the ways in which human beings express their humanity.
In a culture where so much emphasis was put on heaven or hell, purity or sin, sex or cold showers, this more philosophical consideration of faith was like a breath of fresh air for me. There was something more poetic, more philosophical, and ultimately something a lot more human about this way of looking at the meaning of religion and Christianity in particular. It also worked in tandem with the emphasis on social justice that I found appealing in the emerging and red letter Christian movements, where action seemed to matter more than mere belief, and social justice more than hardcore heterosexual purity. But this path created a new set of contradictions and problems, as much of the analysis that I was reading still involved the type of fairly Protestant-coded identity formation, which, while emphasizing the importance of social justice praxis, did so without a deeper analysis of the economic and social conditions which created the need for that praxis. Put more simply, there was a philosophically motivated call to respond to injustice in society without a more political and economically motivated call to understand and transform the conditions creating that injustice. Also, it still seemed like no matter what, we weren't supposed to jack off or have sex. In case you're wondering, at this point in the story, had Michael had sex yet? So at this point, I did what any politically radical college graduate without any discernible career prospects does. I took out loans I'd never be able to repay to attend grad school in the humanities. Now, if I went to college to figure out how to use Christianity to change the world, I went to grad school to figure out if Christianity was actually a useful system for changing the world, or if there was something else. Around the time I started grad school, there were two parallel trends in the fields of philosophy and theology that were both incredibly influential to me. Now, the first of these was a theological movement called radical orthodoxy. To put it as simply as possible, these scholars used many of the resources of contemporary European philosophy to question the validity of modernity and argue for a new sort of Christian theology that veered closer to socialism than it did liberalism. Looking back, it had a lot of problems that I didn't see at the time, and ultimately didn't really amount to much. And a lot of the dudes that were involved in it got really reactionary as they got older. Now, the other was a looser trend amongst atheist and often Marxist philosophers to take Christianity seriously, not for its theological content, but for its ability to articulate truths about human subjectivity and the functions of political ideology.
Something tremendous happens in Christianity, because remember, after the death of Christ, we don't get back to the Father. What we get is Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit is the egalitarian community bound by love. You know what Christ says when he's asked, how will we recognize if you are here? When there is love between the two of you, I am there. It's just the immanence of an emancipatory collective.
Now, if the theologians thought that radical philosophy could help them deconstruct capitalist modernity, the philosophers thought theology could offer a resource for better understanding both the ideological function of capitalism and how we can form political movements to fight against it. And maybe more importantly, during this time, I encountered the history of Latin American liberation theology, which offered the more overt political and often just straight up Marxist analysis that I felt was lacking from the American progressive evangelical movement. Now, I could say a lot more about all that I was reading and thinking about during this period and all of the internal and philosophical and theological struggles that I had at the time. But at the end of the day, my experiences as a grad student led me to realize that my primary interest or allegiance was not God, it was humanity, which meant that true purpose could be found in doing what I could to create a just and egalitarian world, regardless of whether God existed or not. And while my religious experience pointed me to this insight, once I had arrived at it, it seemed that the analytical tools of philosophy and critical theory had more to offer the contemporary task than did Christian theology. And in case anyone's really interested in the nitty-gritty of my life at this point in time, after not going to church for a while in grad school, I started regularly going to Catholic Mass again, mostly because one of the priests there told me that it was okay if I didn't believe in God. And to be clear, for me, this wasn't a journey of giving up my faith, but one of reorienting where that faith was directed. While at one point it was faith that an invisible God was able to facilitate radical change in the world via the work of humans, I now had faith in the project of humanity and the collective ability of human beings to change the fundamental logic of their own world. I mean, in a sense, if one of the main functions of religion as I had experienced it was asking big questions about the nature of reality and existence and thinking about what it would mean to make the world better and more just, I basically followed the same function, just in a different form, which is why a lot of the philosophy that I found myself really attracted to was answering a lot of the same questions and offering really similar strategies for how to accomplish those things. I'll give you an example with the help of the two thinkers that were the most transformative at this point in my life. The contemporary philosopher Alain Badiou and 19th century Christian philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. Now, in Kierkegaard's book, Practice in Christianity, he outlines a distinction between what he calls the church triumphant and the church militant. While the former operates as if they have access to objective theological certainty, in which faith means reinforcing that which they already know for sure, the latter operates with a fundamental existential anxiety, a sort of fear and trembling in which their faith must be worked out in practice. While the triumphant church believes that something is true, the militant church believes that that truth necessitates subjective passion and action. Alain Badiou outlines something similar, albeit strictly atheistic, in his own theory of subjectivity, which I first encountered in his book Being and Event, but he also writes about this in the context of the Apostle Paul. Now, for Badiou, truth is a thing that happens in the world, interrupting the situation as we know it. When the subject experiences this truth, they have the opportunity to become faithful subjects of the event, thus reorienting their existence around the implications of this truth. Now, Badiou is willing to use religion as an analogy for this process, but he argues that the only conditions where truth occurs are politics, art, science, and love. Now, in his book, Logics of Worlds, Badiou expands this analysis in a way that makes sense of how, at least at a structural level, Christianity and radical politics share a similar view of the structure of reality. And much like the more radical Christian thinkers that I'd encountered, Badiou argues for faith as an important component of what it means to live for an idea and try to change the world. Now, as he describes it, there are two dominant ideologies today. You got democratic materialism and materialist dialectics. Now, democratic materialism argues that only two things exist: bodies and languages. Materialist dialectics argues that only two things exist, bodies and languages, except that they're are truths. You can almost think of democratic materialism as a type of liberalism that argues there just is what there is in the world, and we have to manage what there is the best we can in the conditions that we currently exist under. Whereas materialist dialectics is more akin to a radical political program that thinks that radical change is possible. Much in the same way that I was originally attracted to Christianity because I saw it as an antidote to the seemingly empty world of consumerism and American militarism because it offered the hope that something else was possible, this Marxist-inspired materialist philosophy does something similar, arguing that truths exist as exceptions to what is, and as the openings of possibility for new worlds, and things that are capable of forming new radical communities of human beings. It's a philosophical and political logic that does not necessitate the existence of any form of divinity. But I want to be clear here that for me, this journey never amounted to a sort of crass radical atheism, in which I then had to reject God and the entire Christian tradition. Instead, it led me to a new appreciation and understanding of the value of religion and the way in which religion is ultimately a way in which we explore big questions about our own humanity. Along those same lines, let me just state very clearly that I'm not saying that to be a radical socialist or Marxist or whatever means you have to be an atheist. I'm not trying to say that you can't be active in a church and have radical politics or something like that. Not what I'm saying, just so that no one says that I said that. This is the part of the video where I'm saying that I don't say that. And something that really helped me understand this was the work of German philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach. He famously wrote that the secret of theology is anthropology, meaning that at the heart of religion is really just an understanding of our own humanity. And I think Feuerbach's work in many ways gets at the heart of what I'm trying to explain in this video, so I want to quote him at length right here. Religion, at least the Christian religion, is the expression of how man relates to himself, or more correctly, to his essential being. But he relates to his essential being as to another being. The divine being is nothing other than the being of man himself, or rather, the being of man abstracted from the limits of the individual man or the real corporeal man, and objectified, i.e., contemplated and worshipped as another being, as a being distinguished from his own. For Feuerbach, religion is how we understand ourselves and our humanity and the world. It's like the first step to doing speculative philosophy. It helps us embrace philosophy and humanity in a fuller sense. It's not a rejection of religion or of Christianity, but an understanding of what's really going on at the heart of human religious worship and experience.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now
we're all called to be the good Samaritan and lift our neighbor out of the ditch. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you start to say, maybe the whole road to Jericho needs to be rethought.
No, it doesn't. It's telling them you can't go defecate on the side of the street, clean up, get out of here. I'm going to put you in prison.
So hold on now. You think that
they're homeless by choice.
No.
my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear.
And I built you an altar. I built you an altar.
The Bible certainly is one of, if not, I mean, it is the book.
He was going to change the world, and he did. Charlie's life was a turning point for this country. It was a miracle.
If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's cool.
Jesus wants to be Lord of your life.
So if Christianity was able to help me and lots of other people that I've talked to both in person and online arrive at a sort of socialistic, humanistic, Marxist political project, then why the fuck does it also seem to create a full-on white nationalist authoritarian movement here in the United States? You know, one that seems to basically hate people to hate all the people except for a very small subset of people who all have certain things in common. I mean, it's very fucked up. Like, it's really fucked up. And this is something that I want to explore in a potential part 2 of this video, which I'm planning on making, assuming that the reaction to this one is positive. So if you want me to get into that, please let me know, because I'll do it. You know, because while Christianity itself might have an emancipatory and humanistic message at its core, there's been an insidious force corrupting American Christianity from the inside for decades. And that force has recently grown way more brazen in its attempt to use faith as a mechanism of political power and control. So come back next month and I'll hopefully be talking about all of that. In the meantime, I would love to hear from anyone who shared a similar journey in going from Christianity or any faith tradition to a leftist political orientation, including those who have maintained their religious faith alongside a radical political commitment, because I think that's cool too. To be clear, I think that's cool too. I'm very sensitive to the idea that someone who has that position might think that I'm out to get them here, and I'm really not. You know, I think there's probably more of us out there than we might realize, and that sharing our stories might be helpful and even inspiring to those who are working this out for themselves in real time. I think it's even more important that we talk about this because, at least in America, Christianity is being associated with some bad stuff. I think in general, a lot of religion is being associated with some bad stuff politically, so it's good to acknowledge that it doesn't have to be that way. In the meantime, just a reminder, this channel is still primarily funded and supported by my patrons. Thank you so much to those of you who support this channel. It means a lot. If you're interested in getting involved, you get all the videos early without ads. You get some extra stuff. There's a reading group. I'm planning some more things for 2026, so consider signing up. And even if you don't have it in you to support me financially right now, which I totally get, sign up for the free Patreon, because you'll always know when videos and streams come out. I'll let you know about live events. It's just a way that we can keep in touch without the mediation of this algorithm, which is sometimes bad, which is sometimes not good. And as always, leave comments, share videos. It all helps a lot. It means a lot to me. I love doing this. I love having these conversations. I love then getting to talk to you all about it. I love working with the people I work with to make this stuff. So, you know, thank you. This is fun. I'm having fun. This is what fun looks like. I'm having a good time. I'm having a good time. This is fun. I like it all. Oh, and just in case anyone was wondering, I eventually did have sex. And it was fine.